Hi, hello, and welcome back to the Wool Seed Knitting channel. My name is Rachel. I am a knitter based in Ottawa, Canada, and this is my 6-month stash busting update. I said I was going to do these quarterly. For life reasons, that couldn't happen, and so today I'm going to talk about how much progress I made and what sorts of projects I did to reduce the amount of yarn I have sitting around unused in my house in the last 6 months since the end of March 2025. The rough outline of this video is a quick review of my original goals for 2025 stash busting, the system I'm using to track how much yarn I'm using and the kind of rules for it, an outline of what I did in quarter 2 of this year, which is beginning of April through end of June, quarter 3, which is July through September 30th, and then my expectations for this last quarter and how much I'm going to be able to get done. And I have a whole pile of projects, a whole bunch of photos of other ones to show you. So for those of you who watched my quarter 1 Woman vs. Stash video, you may recall that my overall goal at the time was to knit down 2,025 grams of yarn from my stash, which is held in this closet, by the end of this year, and that was going to be a net negative number. So any yarn that I spun or bought or received as a gift would count against that total, and any yarn that I used either for myself or as a gift would count towards that goal. And then I had a tracker that's color coded. It's a spreadsheet in whatever off-brand version of Excel my MacBook has. And all of this is measured in grams. I have a little kitchen scale. I use it to the best of my ability to track accurately, and I think it's fun. At the end of quarter 1, I revised that goal and I said, you know what, maybe net negative 2,025 grams is not ambitious enough. Why don't I see if I can do that by roughly the end of my birthday month, which is June? Can I be down 2,000 grams by then? And I can tell you now confidently, since that was 3 months ago, I absolutely could not, and I did not achieve this at all. That's okay. I think I have a lot more clarity in how I knit and what I knit and the speed at which I knit than I did at the beginning of this, which is part of the reason why tracking is useful. So at the end of quarter 1, I was just shy of 1,000 grams of yarn out. I think it was at net negative 979 or something like that. And by the end of quarter 2, I was net negative 1,370 grams. So I will put a screenshot of what the tracker looked like the end of June or the beginning of July, and you will see in the top right-hand corner my key, so you can see what the different categories are. You'll see that there is, of course, this third column, total out of my house, which at the time was around 1,300 grams of yarn. Total out of my house is any gift knits plus de-stash, because as much as I find it useful to use what I have for myself, I have now been knitting for 4.5 years. I don't actually need to be making myself 7 sweaters and 15 pairs of socks a year. And a way to actually actively declutter is to use my materials for gifts. So for pretty much every gift giving occasion this year, people have been receiving knitting from me. And I sometimes try and put the brakes on the amount of gift knitting I do so that it doesn't become an expectation. This year, I've kind of thrown caution to the wind, and for every colleague who's leaving, person in my life who's having a baby, birthday, because I wanted to, people are receiving gifts from me. They're usually knit and occasionally crocheted. So that is the green category. And I find that to be just a bit more of an effective way to declutter things in my house. I'm looking at moving in the next year, and these are the things that sort of make a bit more of a difference and add to my satisfaction when it comes to much more effectively destashing and decluttering. So I have been tracking yarn out of my house as its own category, and I have been tracking that one with special interest because it's nice to think of actually reducing the amount of stuff in my house. So despite my very lofty goal of doubling the amount of yarn I used in the first quarter by the first half of the year, that did not work. I had a lot going on. Part of the reason why I didn't film was because I had big family things going on. I was out of the city blah, 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 blah. Life goes on. But I kept knitting throughout. I would say the stash busting highlights of, surprise, I got a cat. So I would say the main project for quarter 2 of this year / the spring for me was absolutely, beyond the shadow of a doubt, my Scout shawl. I put so much time and energy into this thing, and I feel like I was so rewarded for that. This project was so fulfilling for me. This was truly just such a joy to knit. It was so much fun. This is my Scout shawl. It is, I think, the scrappiest thing I have ever made, and I love it with my whole heart. I think it's also one of the best things I've ever made, and this has been on my to knit list since its moment in the sun a few years ago. I don't care that it's not a big deal anymore. I love it. And this, I think, took me about 3 months. I kept pretty fulsome notes on Ravelry. I'll link mine down below, so if you want, you can go see. But I put a ton of scraps into this. I really thought this was going to bust so much stash. I had a ton of leftover superwash merino sock bits or mini skeins or odds and ends from other sock projects from the past few years. And I grabbed so many of them, and they all went into this. Now I think I can pretty confidently recommend this as a stash buster with some amount of creativity if you want. I think I have like 11 different yarns in this, and it was so creatively nourishing. I don't use that kind of language often, but putting together the color combinations for each one of these blocks using the scrap yarns I had, keeping in mind the limited quantities that I had, kind of living on the edge to see if I could stretch things, but also seeing this large bag of 4 grams here, 20 grams there, of all these different colors from different things come together was so incredibly satisfying. And this is, in general, just such a fun project if you like color work. I found that at any point when any of these things started to get boring, yay, there's a new section. And each one of these repeats is really quite memorizable, so it's not like you have to keep up the 2 different charts that you're working on for most of the time. It's just incredibly satisfying. This was a project that I wanted to work on most of the time, which is good because it took me quite a while. I also found that this was really effective for using up leftovers from like heel toe cuff 20 or 25 gram contrast balls from different sock sets, or 20 gram mini skeins. Or if you have an advent of minis, I recommend trying to find a way to combine them for this. I weighed this, and come meet everybody. This is Prosecco. She doesn't like it when I hold her, but she's the best. Sorry for the cat interruptions. She's new and the most interesting thing in my life right now. So in terms of stash busting, I would say that this is an incredibly efficient project for using up scraps that are beautiful and that you want to showcase, but you don't have that much of, and you're kind of nervous about making things last, because each one of these sections is actually quite small. And because in Tarja, you're stopping the yarn for each section at the joins, you're not carrying it back and forth the whole time the way that you do for stranded color work. So effectively, for like this row of stars, for example, like 20 stitches, you can go pretty far with that, especially for fingering weight yarn. So if you have an advent or a couple different mini skein sets in complementary colors, I think it might be worth applying some brain power to think about how you might be able to combine them to get your own scrappy Scout shawl. The flip side of it being very, very efficient in extending the length, or I guess the amount of each scrap that you have, is after 3 months of pretty dedicated knitting and of this being my primary project, I weighed it and it only got 182 grams of yarn out of my stash. I couldn't believe it. I kept checking the scale to make sure it was accurate because I thought there's no way I put functionally 3 months of knitting into a project that got so many little balls out of my stash, and it's only 182 grams out by the actual metric I'm using to track and effectively win little points for myself. So this is, I would say, the highlight of quarter 2. I don't regret it. I love this thing so much. It is arguably my current knitting magnum opus. If you're coming here for stash busting ideas and you have the time and the space to spend a while on something and you like color work, Scout Shawl. This was my main stash busting, scrap busting endeavor of quarter 2, and I would count this as a big reason why I didn't get that far weight-wise. However, I have so many fewer scraps and oddballs of yarn as a result of this project. So even though I did not use up a lot by the metric I'm technically using to track, I look at my stash and it was a lot more organized into bigger projects and like, oh, the yarn that I bought to work on this sweater, the yarn that I have to do those mittens, as opposed to scraps, which for me did feel like a really effective decluttering thing in my brain and as part of this project. So I still consider this to be a massive success. As you can see, I have not woven in all the ends. I've been doing that slowly. That's fine. It's not even really cold now. Besides that, most of my quarter 2 knitting was pretty stockinette heavy basic stuff that I could do while commuting when I didn't want to take this to work, for example, or before bed when I didn't want to potentially mess up repeats. I made 2 pairs of gift socks, one for my mother, one for my boyfriend's mother. I also made a pair of stockinette socks for myself. These are the Wool socks you might have seen on my tracker because Wool is the name of the store I got them from. They're, I think, a Quebec-based hand dyer. If there's yarn information that I can find or pattern information, all of it will be linked down below. I was still very much focused on specifically scrap busting in this period, and I was using this Senna's Garn Sisu, my ancestral enemy, as a lefty knitter, but whatever, to finish up the heel, toe, and cuffs of these. And I ran out of the second one, and then I came back home to Ottawa and found the last little ball of it that I could have used for this toe and was like, but whatever. I used up another ball of leftover sock scraps and this beautiful yarn that I bought last year that has these nice pinks and greens, so that was really enjoyable for me. I made a sweater for a coworker's dog. It's called the Lucky Dog Sweater by Soleil Salvo. It's a Pearl Soho published pattern. I really liked it. I'm looking forward to making more sweaters for dogs out of it. The only thing is that there is a mistake in stitch marker placement when you're shaping the chest, but apparently the dog likes it and is now willing to go outside in his new sweater. I have received photos of the dog in the sweater, which is all I ever really want. And that was a very fun and engaging pattern to do as well that was unusual and kind of tickled my brain in exciting ways, and also used up a whole bunch of superwash wool and acrylic mix that I had in my house. I also made a pillow for my brother. You can see that's the only yarn in of that section. It's all now since been removed through pillow and other gift knits, and in the pillow I ended up using other deep stash yarn, so overall I'm pretty happy about it. And that was just a self-drafted pillow based on a design that my brother made. He has a very specific vision for what he wanted for this pillow in his new apartment to go along with his couch. I knit it. It's in his house now. I used up some buttons as well that were in my stash from my friend Carolyn from her grandmother's stash. They're really pretty. They complement it well. I'm very happy. So after the whole quarter 2 complete failure to achieve my new lofty updated double my overall knitting productivity goal of hitting my original annual goal halfway through the year, I switched to thinking I still want to be ahead of schedule. Net negative 2,025 grams is the bare minimum. I think I would like net negative 2,025 grams out of my house, not just out of stash, and to see how quickly I can get there and how much I can add on. So then I move that net negative 2,025 gram goal to the end of quarter 3. Moving into quarter 3, which was basically summer knitting, I leaned mostly into, again, small gift knits and fingering weight, longer term summer fibers. So this, in effect, meant this linen sport weight t-shirt, which as you can see is unfinished, I'll get into it, and a whole bunch of gifts that have mostly been given away, so I will put some pictures on screen. And By September 30th, the end of quarter 3, I was down 759 grams of yarn out of like my total stash, and then 936 grams out of my house. In a surprising upset, the total out of my house has started to overtake the total knit category. I think because it doesn't include yarn in the same way that the main tracking category I'm grading myself on actually does. This summer, I actually didn't knit all that much. I was busy doing other things. And also my friends and I went to Twist Fiber Festival, an annual tradition now, and we acquired some yarn. So I bought 300 grams, go with some hand spun to make a sweater. And then we also exchanged gifts. And so I received another 2 amounts of yarn from my friends. And that really took away from the yarn out, which I think is another important reminder of how easy it is to collect these things and how long it takes to actually use them, which again, in a lot of ways is wonderful, especially in times of scarcity, to have the materials that we need to do the hobby that we love. And it seems that theme of this summer was a lot slower knitting, and I spent most of it working on my main project, being this sport weight linen cotton tee, which has been in my stash for about 4 years, I think. So it felt really good to use. I have wanted to make this pattern in this yarn for 4 years, so it felt like a higher quality stash down goal than some of the others. In summer, it felt appropriate. I didn't mind if I finished it towards the end of summer and then wore it more into the early autumn season. This was 4 skeins of 50 grams of Kelborn Woolens Mojave. I really enjoyed working with it, even though plant fibers tend to be a bit tougher on my wrists. And in total, this was 184 grams of yarn out of my stash that I was working on consistently throughout the summer, peppered in with a whole bunch of smaller, truly scrappy projects for gifts. So some people in my life are expecting I knit some baby hats and baby toys for them. I used some yarn to lengthen a sweater I had made my brother that was accidentally way too short. Things that truly felt like, again, kind of like the Scout shawl, reducing the amount of yarn I had in stash, like one oddball at a time, which was very satisfying. And overall, even though I didn't actually knit that much down for the summer, it felt like a very satisfying mix of projects. This long-term thing that had been on my to-do list and in my brain for so long, and a whole bunch of little scrappy things using this ball that I didn't otherwise have an idea for, or I'm happy to put in another 4 inches to the sweater I accidentally made into a crop top for my brother, is what else is that yarn for? I found it to be very satisfying. It was harder on my wrists because almost all of this was cottony or linen-y blends, but it felt very true to the spirit of what I wanted this year in this project to be. And then the beginning of September hit, and I was hit with this tidal wave of knitting inspiration. I had not been knitting as much this past year as I had been in years prior. A lot of the circumstances in my life have changed. I'm just busier. I work mostly in the office now as opposed to from home, and knitting during Zoom meetings is totally fine, but knitting at in-person meetings doesn't feel the same. And I cast on so many things. I made plans for even more things once I finished my cast-ons. Some of these things include this scrappy pair of Halloween socks by Charlotte Stone. This orange is the same as the pumpkin baby hats, or orange, I guess, depending on what time of year it is. And I'm playing a kind of extreme game of yarn chicken with this. Super scrappy, super satisfying. I was so looking forward to finishing these and having them in time for Halloween. One of my friends loves the Dot Pebbles frog that was super viral a few years ago. So I started making her one for her birthday. It's mostly just ends right now because this is a whip, but I started making her a frog. I have pink in here to make the frog an outfit in her favorite color. I started a second fortune sweater by Petite Knit in yarn that I, again, had for 3 years now and have wanted to use this for this project and haven't gotten around to it. And I felt really engaged from a stash busting perspective and knitting things that are both really fun and exactly what I want to have or to give to other people right now perspective. The Ottawa Hospital reopened their call for knitted newborn hats. So I made one and had plans to look at my scraps for other newborn appropriate yarns to make more newborn hats and get them out of stash, a win-win. And all of these things were really creatively engaging for me and exciting, and I was knitting a little bit more. And then all of a sudden, it felt like my hands, especially my right hand, seized up and became so inflamed that using my thumbs for anything, including opening a doorknob or squeezing a shampoo bottle or holding a mug, became almost intolerably painful. I was diagnosed with de Quervain's tenosynovitis. And I haven't been able to knit for a couple weeks, and I probably will not be able to for many months. That is part of the reason why this has not been fixed and finished. It's part of the reason why the ends on that scout shawl have not been woven in, and why a whole bunch of whips that would have been very easy to finish sit as whips in bags hidden in my house so I don't have to look at them. I am coming to terms with this, I think, sort of slowly, quite timely for me. From a very selfish perspective, Ichi of Tangerine Knits posted her first video in a year. Turns out that she was on pause from knitting for a year because of this very same knitting injury. And I think that really helped put things into perspective. I'm not the only person that I know who has dealt with this. And Marina Skua did a video on knitting injuries. She had the same thing. It took her 6 months to recover. And that has helped me, I think, adjust my expectations for how long it's going to take me to get over this. I'm in PT. I'm getting new ergonomic equipment at work. I have done a whole bunch of the things that they say to do to recover from this, but the reality is tendons heal slowly. And I can't entirely take a break from everything that aggravates this because I work a desk job, and that is the primary irritant. It turns out knitting is just something else that I had to cut out. So that's a real bummer. I think I would have been able to finish a few of the projects I had on the go and hit my coveted net 2,025 grams out of my house goal had I not come down with this. And not just from I had this fun goal and I was knitting towards something that really, I think, gave me some focus, besides the fact that I just love knitting so much, and I was typically knitting most days. But I found this also really frustrating because I've knit significantly less this year than I had in previous years. The fact that this has flared up now when I thought that I was doing all the things like stretching and taking breaks, etc., to prevent these sort of repetitive stress injuries, I find to be quite demoralizing. The reality is knitting is not the only thing that can cause this, and texting has been a big one. Using my computer mouse at the office has been a big one now that I'm spending most of my time in the office and not at my home setup. Apparently the way I was riding a bike and sleeping, also not good. And so I'm going to change all these things in my life and hopefully have better systems in place in the months to come to A, recover, and B, not develop this again in the future. But I think that's going to really affect this whole Stash Down project, and I might just have to concede defeat that I'm not going to hit even my original net negative 2,025 grams out of stash goal through knitting this year. The year is kind of an arbitrary endpoint. That's fine. When I recover, I will pick up these projects and continue. My PT has cleared me for knitting for 15 minutes at a time, I think a day, but I tried that a couple days ago and it really felt like quite a few steps back in terms of how I was feeling. So we're going to go really, really slowly. We're going to prioritize the projects that are small and have concrete endpoints, like each leg of the frog, for example, with nowhere close to the same time expectations that I had before. And I'm trying to shift my energy towards other hobbies. So this has been actually kind of a long video. I guess it's been half podcast, half Stash Down update, but I think that kind of makes sense as a format for me moving forward. And I am very curious. Anyone else who's had either de Quervain's or other sorts of wrist and hand repetitive stress injuries, what have you found to be the most effective strategies for coping in the short term and healing in the long term? What other creative endeavors for someone who's fibercraft inclined like me do you maybe suggest? In the meantime, I have been working on the patterns that I said I was going to work on since I can't knit. I've made some progress, and I checked out a book from the library on knitting pattern writing, and I'm going to reach out to some tech editors soon for the Howl's Moving Castle diamond cardigan. So if that's something you're still interested in, it's in the works. And in the meantime, you will find me running and reading until I don't know, enjoy myself somehow doing those things too. We'll see. Anyway, I think that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you for sticking around. I appreciate you being here. So I'm wishing you guys all the best. I don't know when I'm going to come back to chat with you guys next, especially now that I'm not going to be knitting, but it was really nice to sit down and catch up. And thank you for your patience with me, as always. All right, wishing you all the best. And here's a collage of photos of my cat. Bye.